Service. Hey everyone, welcome to Chef Sense. I'm your host, Chef Massey. Okay, so today on the podcast, AJ Richards, thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, James, thanks for asking, man. I was super excited to get the email and invitation.
Yeah, and you do cover a lot of initiatives and what you're working on. Can we start at the beginning, just about like AJ Richards, how, because I think sometimes the upbringing and nurturing grows into the passion. So would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely the situation in my case. I grew up in a small town. At least when I was growing up, was a small town called St. George, Utah. It's just outside of Zion National Park for anybody that's kind of more familiar with the national parks in Utah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And growing up, I mean, it was a small town growing up. My family homesteaded 60 miles south of there on the Arizona Strip.
Oh,
So north side of the Grand Canyon.
okay.
And we call it, it's known as Bundyville to some. My
Okay.
family are the Bundy Ranchers. Some people will know that name, others won't. But it's if you do a
Cool.
Google search of Bundy Ranchers, you'll find plenty of information on them.
Oh, cool. Okay.
They are known for taking on the federal government in 2014 and then 2016, fighting for the rights of basically grazing rights. They settled that in 1916 when they made that available for homesteading. And homesteading now, people think of it as buy a piece of land and grow some food. Be self-sustaining. That's similar to what used to be, but back in the day, it was, here's a piece of ground in an uninhabitable area. Good luck. If you want to go and stake your flag there and put a fence up, you can homestead it, right?
Right.
And then you have to be self-sufficient because the grocery store is not a backup land because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So that was old school homesteading, but my family did that in 1916. And so growing up, my family are 5 generations of ranchers. I'm the city slicker cousin, I say, because I didn't grow up on a ranch myself.
Yeah.
I just got to do the cattle drives and the brandings as often as I could as a kid.
Okay.
So growing up that way, we would have these big family meetings on Sundays.
Yep.
And have multiple topics, but the primary topics that I remember as a kid were around the control of the Bureau of Land Management, otherwise known as the BLM, the original BLM.
Okay.
And they regulate how land is managed, like public lands. So they're like the Park Service, they're like the National Forest Service, but they're their own entity. They're under the Department of the Interior. So I would grow up hearing these family meetings about these water rights being reduced or taken away and these grazing rights being threatened. And, there's a special beetle they have found. And so now you're not allowed to do this on your ranch anymore to protect the beetle, which that beetle ended up wiping out millions of trees and causing some major forest fires in the West because of, those policies to protect those beetles.
Right.
So yeah, growing up, that's what it was like, and so I had a really strong introduction into the importance of agriculture and its relationship in our life, and it certainly has shaped me to be who I am.
Yeah, that's amazing. Hearing all that, coming from a farming family myself, Northern California, and my uncle was ag commissioner of Siskiyou County up there. And, another uncle worked in unfortunately, ag chem company. So there was a lot of involvement, not just with our farm, but as they, kind of went along. And it's funny how it's interesting how these things, when you're raised around special people like that, it just kind of resonates into you and into the fibers of who you are. So, that's where I think looking at, your story and the journey you've been through, and also to say thank you as being a veteran, a real warrior of our country, and to also the men and women that have done that service. So I absolutely wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for all of you. So I was taking a quick second there, but looking at all of this, what you're developing, can you talk about the beef initiatives and the challenges that you ran into that kind of fostered where you had worked on your platform for that software?
Yeah. So I think, like many people, COVID changed the trajectory of lots of our lives.
Yep.
Some good, some bad, you know. And so I was selling beef for my family's ranch. You know, I because I'm the city slicker cousin, I didn't inherit a ranch. I didn't
Yeah.
know how to get into it really. Um, I spent my whole life with the dream of one day being a rancher and
Mhm.
having a ranch. And I found myself doing all these little different jobs just to try to make enough money to be a rancher. My last business in Phoenix, Arizona went through a bankruptcy and it moved me
Mm.
back home to St. George, Utah.
Mm.
And I kind of realized, like, man, I'm trying to do all of these things to get into ag and it's not working out. So what if I just go get into agriculture? And
Mhm.
so I was in a transition period of my life. So I called my cousin and I said, hey, can I sell beef for your ranch?
Mm.
And he said yes. And so we started working together. His ranch is called Anchor Brand Ranch. He's got a
Mm.
really great YouTube channel, shows a lot of what it's like to live the day in the life on a ranch in the desert of Nevada. So anyway, started
Very
doing that
cool.
with him towards the end of 2019. Well, then COVID hit.
Mm.
And so what would happen is he would raise the animal, deliver it to the slaughterhouse, and then I would pick up the finished meat and go and distribute it. So I was
Mhm.
handling the sales and marketing and distribution on that side. We started running into the problem after COVID hit that we could not get slaughter. There was
Mhm.
no availability. We would
Wow.
call, and previously we would call and they could get us in like the next week or the next 2 weeks. After COVID hit, we would call and they're like, we can get you in 18 months. Like, holy crap, a year and a half? I got customers that
Wow.
are getting a monthly order of beef, and you're telling me I can't get processing for a year and a half? Like, business is over. So, what I did is
Wow.
or what would happen is my cousin would then schedule processing for any slaughterhouse that had any room for us, and they would deliver it there, and then I'd go find it, go pick it up. And that led to a whole nother host of issues. The cutting was the way they would cut the meat was different. The wrapping was different. The labeling was even different.
Okay.
Um, and so inconsistencies in the brand started to become a problem. And there are so little margins in selling meat anyway
Mhm.
that, and a lot of people think the farm, because meat's expensive when you buy it direct, they think that sometimes people think that they're making hand over fist. They're
Yeah.
not. They're actually finally just viable. The other way, they're not viable and they're working off farm jobs just to pay for the hobby. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and that's why, frankly, that's why we're down to less than 700,000 ranchers in the entire United States. So
Wow.
it was a nightmare. Eventually, I had to stop it and shut it down. And then I was doing whatever I could to make extra money for the family. My wife was holding down she was the primary breadwinner, and I was trying to figure out what the heck I'm supposed to be doing. And I was driving for Instacart. I was,
Mhm.
working a part-time, working a job with some friends of mine doing concrete during 2020, just whatever I could do.
Yep.
And I think I was driving for Instacart. I'm doing a delivery. St. George has surrounding areas where there's livestock, and I'm hearing the news talk about empty store shelves. Like there's no food because the supply chain broke.
Right.
And I mean, I can go into details on that if you want, but the supply chain broke. And so I'm like, geez, I see cattle standing all over in the fields. Like
Hmm.
there is food. We just have a broken supply chain.
Okay.
So
Wow.
we've become so reliant on everything being done for us and convenience.
Mhm.
All I got to do is go to the grocery store because the grocery store has a buyer that goes and finds the wholesaler that then that
Sure.
wholesaler goes to the big packer. The big packer's
Right.
going to the feedlot, who's then going to the auction. Like all of these steps that have
Right.
been done for us that we don't have to put much thought how we eat.
Right.
And that reared its ugly head in 2020.
Okay.
And so I'm like, what if there was a software that existed
Mhm.
that was like Airbnb that would connect the consumer directly with the producer, and that software just did its thing, and then the people that were behind the scenes just stayed out of the way and let the consumer go right to the producer, and the producer makes the majority of the revenue
Mhm.
so that they stay viable, so that they pass that on to their next generation.
Which is
And
great.
yeah, and frankly, so that more people who want to go into growing food have a platform they can sell it on.
Mhm.
Um, And so that's kind of how the idea was born. I'll
Okay.
be, just be completely frank. This is, I'm, I am not this smart. This is an
Oh, geez.
idea that was born of
Yeah.
God. He put that thought in my head, and
Yeah.
it was my job to just go and put, one foot in front of the other, despite all of my weaknesses, despite all of my self doubts that I'm the right person to even take this on. I just had faith and kept going, it's been 4 years this month
Oh,
of
wow.
from the
Okay.
vision.
So a lot of pre-work. I mean, so this
Yeah.
is like a direct ship situation. Am I?
This is like, yes, but it's like, think of it like Airbnb.
Yeah.
When you rent an Airbnb, typically it's the owner of the home that's rented that house or room or whatever that looks like. I just
Yeah.
went to Austin and we stayed in an Airbnb that the homeowner lived there. They just vacated while we were there for a few days.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Right. And there are
Okay.
some situations like that. And so think of it like that. But now, if I'm the producer, if I'm a farmer,
Hmm.
and I'm close to you, you can
Yep.
open up our website and on a map see who's around you growing and raising food that will
Right.
sell right to you. Now, our slogan is shake the hand that feeds you. So
Right. That's
now
right. Yeah.
you can get to know me personally.
Sure.
And if there's ever a supply chain disruption, you know where your food came from. So as long as
Right.
I'm still growing and raising food because you're supporting me, it doesn't matter what's happening at the grocery store.
Right.
You go right to the source.
Right. And that's amazing. Well, and here, because, being in New England or especially in the Berkshires, when COVID hit us, and that's interesting you said that because a lot of our local farms here, we've got about, I mean, this is pre-COVID, but it's, 475 farms in this region alone, almost 60,000 acres. So you can see it's like small to mid, and it's like, but seeing those farms take off during that burst, a lot of the farm stands blew up. I mean, we've
Yeah.
had a couple of farms that were like erupted to the point they ended up going into a storefront. I mean,
Wow.
it's amazing. It was just so
Awesome.
great. And I think we had that expendable, some people had that more of an expendable income than ever.
Mm.
So, you're able to buy into and bypass, and say, okay, we've got supply chain issues. I'm going to my local farm now, and you're obviously getting something so much better, but with so much behind it anyways, in that story it tells. But that was interesting. There is a bit of a drop off that's occurred for a number of them too since COVID, and things have kind of slipped back to attempting to be normal. So
Yeah, humans have the tendency to take the path of least resistance.
right, right.
And so when you say a little bit more of expendable income, if you're referring to some of those stimulus checks,
Yes, exactly, correct.
the what I think is important is that consumers understand that the food supply chain exists
Hmm.
because we created that. And what I mean by
Yeah.
that is stores do what sales data tells them.
Yep.
And so when we buy the junk, they make more junk
Right.
because
Right.
that's what we're telling them that we want. And their job a corporation, as a business, their primary job and fiduciary responsibility
Hmm.
is to grow revenue.
Right.
So they're not going to do higher quality proteins and naturally growing food
Sure.
if the sales data says you should give up more shelf space for bullshit processed food.
Right.
Now, when we talk about the cost side of things, we as human beings also like convenience and habit. We like to feed our habits. And
Hmm.
so, you know, there are long-term consequences of buying cheap food that will actually cost you more down the road than the immediate savings you're doing now. Well, why would some people will say, well, what if you just don't have the money? That could be true. And in many cases, I believe it probably is true for some
Hmm.
people. So what I'm about to say, if the shoe fits, then wear it. If it doesn't, then you don't need to.
Right.
If your reason for not buying high quality, nutrient dense food is the cost, I'm going to invite you to look at your other expenses.
Sure.
Are you buying cigarettes, alcohol,
Yeah.
cannabis? Are you going out a lot? What are the other habits that your expenses are going towards that you're choosing
Hmm.
that could otherwise be put towards high quality, nutrient dense food? And then
Right.
that leads into the next part of that discussion, which a good friend of mine, RC Carter, he owns Carter Country Meats. It's a regenerative ranch in Ten Sleep, Wyoming.
Hmm.
He
Cool.
says, what's the value of a good idea? And so his point of that is, if you think about how our body works,
Hmm.
when we feed our gut with highly nutrient dense food, the microbiology, our microgut biome, is actually known to be our first brain.
Mm.
So what we feed our stomach
Right.
feeds the rest of our brain, so that we then interact or react in the world based off of what our gut is doing.
Hmm.
So if I am feeling dull or dim just in terms of my neurons firing and my perception of the world, it's probably because of what I'm feeding myself.
Hmm.
And if you're stuck in an impoverished position, are you feeding your gut biome in a way that will fuel positive and powerful thoughts that could then possibly pull you out of the situation you're in?
Right.
Or, or are you perpetuating that by continuing to eat junk because it's
Right.
cheap? It's
Ultra
cheap.
processed. Yeah.
Yeah,
Food,
ultra
the food
processed.
haze.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah. Okay.
and
Yeah.
so that I can keep paying for my other habits. So yes, when you buy, like, it's changing the concept around what food is worth.
Hmm.
And that's why RC is working on this idea that he's going to label his meat. You know how people will label grass fed and finished or corn and grain
Sure.
finished?
Right.
Well, instead, he's looking at labeling it with the nutrient density as
Oh,
the sell
wow.
as
How
the selling
cool.
point. It's amazing. It's
Wow.
amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's so interesting. And, going into that and the complex ag system and the industrial food system that we've built today, in the States, when you're talking about like what we produce, I mean, even talking to Dr. Marion Nessel, she has the book Food Politics. And, her studies showed her over the many years was that we actually produce twice as many calories than
Okay.
what a man or woman nutritionally needs. And so
Yeah.
these large companies are pushing and selling and also going after, the family unit or the children in the school system. It's really amazing. It's kind of like, as you're going into what you're sharing, that this is a very large machine that has many different connecting points of
Oh
power.
yeah. Oh yeah. And
Um,
the average consumer has no idea about how that interacts.
no,
I I think that, well, first of all, we know that big food and big pharma are directly connected through their investors, through the people
right.
that invest and have a stake, pun intended, a stake in
Hmm.
the game
Sure.
of both sides.
Yep.
Well, when you can make people chronically ill through poor diet, and you have statins and other medications that you can then prescribe them because they're chronically ill, it's a self-perpetuating loop of revenue.
Right.
So what would the incentive ever be of going in a direction that would reduce the need for highly processed foods that make them a ton of money because they're selling an addiction? That's
Hmm.
what they're doing.
Right.
It's a legal addiction. Of course, a lot of other addictions are becoming legalized, but then they're
Yeah.
also selling the cure, right?
Right.
Sell the
The
problem, sell the cure.
medication. It's
Yes.
unbelievable. Well,
Yeah.
talking about that, when you look at like even Latin American countries, for example, like Mexico actually delving into their food system because their healthcare system is linked to the government. This isn't. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, let's make a little change off that diet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where, a lot of Latin America, I mean, there's many indigenous rooted people. And some of these food systems that they had there with the ultra processed, the governments were like, wait a minute, there's the end result here is we're going to have to pay more for this. So they're actually now going in and trying to develop systems where they can educate the children and people, in their communities even by, numbering or putting, uh, I don't know, kid-friendly like pictures or stamps on these ultra-processed foods so that people can recognize it. But here we're like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you start peeling back the layers of this, you start realizing that we don't live in a free country, and
mhm,
our government does not care about us. I mean, you go
yeah.
to other countries and you look at a package of cigarettes. Have you ever seen another country in the package of cigarettes? What's on it?
No, I haven't.
They have actual pictures of throat and mouth cancer and
Oh,
gum
wow.
disease
Okay.
on the package by law, so
Wow.
that when you grab that, you're like, I'm knowingly consuming something that could create that. I mean,
Right.
and so like to your point too about other countries like banning our food, Mexico has now banned, I think they've banned, but the conversation is banning our corn exports
Oh my goodness. Gosh.
specifically because of glyphosate.
Okay, right.
So, like
Okay.
you said, they're because their health care is attached to their government, and that their one's footing the bill. They're like,
Right.
well, geez, how do we reduce the cost of this medical bill? Well, we've got to make people healthier. And one thing we know about glyphosate and the corn grown and the GMO process to make glyphosate resistant corn is not good for our people. So we're not going to allow it.
Right. Yeah, and I
Crazy.
don't yeah, and I wish that that would, slowly change here. I mean, the only thing I can say is some of these, and another point I wanted to, kind of bring up in that system is, and I'm sure you've heard of it, but it was very intriguing for me as a chef being a part of that system.
Mm,
Seeing how the GPOs, these, group purchasing organizations are put together in a way where it is a software, and it tracks and it goes through. But you have, for example, myself, if I'm under an umbrella of a certain cross US or global hospitality management firm, if I stay in my compliance percentage of 80% or higher, typically you want to be higher than that, of using that specific broad line distributor at an 80 or 90% or higher, plus a manufacturer rebate. So if one of those big groups, I get a list of those, it's an additional kickback. I mean, it helps your food costs. I mean, it goes to, the corporate office, and obviously those deals are signed there. But I think it goes into not just the food and beverage hospitality side, but healthcare and our school systems
hmm
that are
Yep.
linked into some of these things that are just feeding off, not let alone the consumer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
But when you look at other examples from abroad where, they are using, regional farms and they've worked these relationships out, let alone I've gone into it too before, but like even the seconds, that are
Mm.
left on a farm that, aren't, because we're so picky in the grocery store too, right? It's got to be a
Yeah.
perfect bell pepper. So,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
why is that zucchini have a scratch mark on it? There's something wrong,
Yep.
so it's, we've done this thing where I think we've allowed ourselves to be conditioned too. And also because we put a lot of trust and
hmm
value in our own politicians and country. I mean, this
hmm
monster has been going on for a long time,
Yeah.
and, I think you doing what you're doing, building a network like that, I think it's amazing, and so like right now when you're doing this, you're in specific areas, but the goal is to go nationwide, right? To all regions.
Yeah.
Like, are you cutting it up on a map in like four sections or I mean
Yeah.
that's silly, but you know what I mean. But are you
Yeah. No, we if you go to fromthefarm.io right
mhm,
now, you'll see that most of our farms and ranches are on the Rocky Mountain West because it's where I
yeah,
live. I've got
sure.
relationships there from a lifetime.
Well, you've got to start somewhere. I mean, yeah,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
logical.
But we've now just have a new seller that signed up in Nebraska.
Oh,
We've
great.
got somebody who I'm really excited that saw the vision, White Oaks Pastures.
Hmm.
They're in Bluffton, Georgia.
Okay.
And so they're on the platform, and Will and Jenny Harris are just incredible people. Um, and we're having conversations all the time, people popping up that are going to be on the map
Yeah,
from all across the nation selling
that's
food direct. So yeah, the goal is, so our rollout strategy over time is get whoever we can kind of scattered throughout the country right now.
Hmm.
My first goal is that you'll be able to order from somebody who's within at least 2-day ground shipping.
Okay, sure. Sure.
That's the first goal.
Hmm.
Then get enough producers on there. It's in within 1 day ground shipping, and then ultimately the long term vision is that we have that farmers and ranchers all across the nation, in every town across the nation, are on the platform, so that no matter where you're at, you can pull
Hmm.
it up and meet the person locally who's selling direct. That was the kind of the awareness that led me to this, is that because I'm the city slicker cousin and I lived in Phoenix, Arizona for 12 years,
Hmm.
I knew how to speak urban, and I also understood the disconnect between urban and rural. And I
Hmm.
also know how producers in the rural environments kind of think and operate, and what they think of people in the urban side, and the lack of communication. And
Okay.
so my vision was, we've got to create something that gives them the opportunity to meet each other
Hmm.
in a designated meeting location, so that we can start to recognize that we rely on one another.
Okay.
The consumers in the urban environments rely on producers to grow and raise their food.
Yep.
The producers rely on the consumers to buy the food that they're growing and raising.
Okay.
And if we can cut out all the middlemen and have people do business direct, I, as a consumer, can ask the producer that any questions that matter to me. Maybe I love corn and grain finished beef. Is this beef on corn and grain? How long is it on corn and grain?
Hmm.
Is it genetically modified corn and grain?
Going into some of the software, and so let's say I, click beef tenderloin or something. So when I click on it, it'll tell me the pack size, the description. So kind of like what you're explaining, that will be part of the description, you think, or?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I could almost do a share screen and show you exactly what it looks like, but
Oh,
but the
oh,
producers have descriptions on there of what they're offering with those particular packages and what
oh,
comes with
cool.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. All right.
So some will sell a la carte, meaning you can load your cart with individual cuts of meat that you're
Yep.
interested in. Some will sell packages, like here's an eighth of a cow. You're going to get the exact portion of an eighth of a
Wow.
cow, and so you're going to get a variety, but it's right from our ranch and our farm.
Oh, that's great. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I
yeah, it's
mean,
really neat.
okay. Wow. All right. You had also done on your podcast, didn't you interview, it was the book, is it Barron's?
Yeah, yeah, I've got it right here.
That I found that kind of going back to the big machine, but educating listeners too on that. That's an amazing book. I need to read it, but
Hmm.
it's kind of like breaking it down. But there's multiple
Yeah,
barons in that, right? The
yeah,
categories.
yeah. The Austin Frerick. This was his first book. It's
Hmm.
called Barron's Money, Power, and the Corruption of Americans' Food Industry. So I'll tell you, I'll just open up to like the chapter. So what he did was he looked at different barons,
Hmm.
leaders in industry, moguls,
Yep.
and then followed them and how they got into power. Because anytime you have a baron or a mogul that controls a significant portion of any industry, it destroys competition and is
Sure.
not is it's not a good thing, right?
Yeah, it becomes monopoly wise, right?
Yeah, it's what the Rockefellers did. It's what
Sure.
um, Think and Grow Rich with the author. Geez, it's one of my
Oh,
favorite books, and I can't even think about it. But
I have to write. Okay.
Carnegie, the name is Carnegie.
Oh, yes, Carnegie, of course. Right.
Yeah, and so clear back then, and during the Industrial Revolution, what they did was bring together a group of experts to dominate the steel manufacturing industry.
Right, which they did
At,
yeah, yeah,
they did
absolutely.
it well,
Yeah.
and then not only did they do it, they got enough power that then they created. They're the ones who created the the education system, because they needed to educate. I'm sorry, they needed to only educate you enough to work in a factory.
Oh,
their
yeah.
their factories, because they became the barons and they were growing so much they needed laborers. Henry
Right.
Ford needed laborers on the auto line. And so I can't remember, but there was somebody that was quoted in that Rockefeller organization or network that said, we don't need you to learn to be an educator or a poet or a thinker. We
Yeah.
don't need those. We have plenty. In other words, me and my aristocrat friends, we've got that part handled. We just need you all to be the laborers.
Yep.
And so like in his book, Hog Barons, so the hog industry, which
Mm-hmm.
is primarily Smithfield, which is all China now.
Yeah, they bought that. Yeah, I was like, whoa, what?
Yeah. Now he's speaking of a specific hog baron that's not
Okay.
part of that, but still was able to dominate.
Okay.
Grain, coffee, dairy, berry, slaughter, which is the big four packers, and grocery. So those are he followed different leaders that dominated those particular, groceries, of course, Walmart,
You're
the
right.
the, the Walton family, Sam Walton. So yeah, that's Barron's is a phenomenal book that really kind of
Right.
highlights what we're seeing. And so right now, for the listeners who don't know, in the beef industry specifically, four corporations control 85% of the beef industry.
Mm.
85. That's dangerous. I
Yeah, it
mean,
is.
and so that's JBS, they're Brazilian owned. Um, Morfrig, they bought out National Beef recently.
Oh, really? Wow.
Morfrig is Brazilian owned. Then you've got Cargill, which is an American owned company by an American family. They talk about Cargill, the Cargill
Oh,
family in
yeah.
here. Cargill's in a ton of hot water for doing things that are unethical, especially out in the jungles of South America, where they're just destroying the rainforest to grow soybeans and all this kind of stuff for their feed
Wow.
operation. And then Tyson. Tyson is a multinational conglomerate, which probably means it's owned mostly by China. Who knows?
Yeah,
But
right.
those are the
Wow.
four companies that control 85% of the market. That's why when the beef packing houses closed because of COVID sickness,
Hmm.
it caused major disruption across the nation
Yep.
because we've become so centralized.
Right. Right. And I've noticed too, that some of these complex manufacturers, they've actually used COVID as an opportunity to like cut back on their inventory that they offered
Yeah, they're
and
going to control the
streamline.
pricing.
Yeah,
Well, and
and
they're going to,
didn't. You're
yeah.
right. So that I found that was very interesting. Can you discuss that whole USDA thing? I think that was it March 12th or 11th that the ban that went on with that?
Man, there's a lot of stuff going on with
The
USDA.
foreign
So,
meat ban on how, because I think it was like,
yeah. So there's two major things that happened
okay.
recently. One, they were trying to pass the approval to import beef from Paraguay.
Hmm.
Um, about 25 years ago, Paraguay was importing beef, but they had an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, which is the scariest disease in terms of impact on herds that we
Wow.
could ever have. And so they shut them down because of that. And recently they tried to approve 25 years later that they could start importing beef from Paraguay again.
Mm.
And there's a few issues with that. One being that they haven't gotten rid of foot and mouth disease in their country,
Okay.
for one. Two, why are we importing more beef, furthering the issues that plague our producers, which is price fixing and fluctuating of the market?
Okay.
So now I believe we need imported beef right now because we do currently have a food system that if we didn't have imported beef, we don't have enough in the United States. We are at 1950s cattle numbers with
Wow.
2024 population. So we have to have imported beef just to live.
Okay.
But we should not be bringing in beef from places that have issues, related to them.
Right. And then the mislabeling, right?
Yeah,
I
and
know
so
with,
the second thing is so that got shut down and no longer allowing Paraguayan beef to come in. There
mhm.
was enough pressure, enough attention. The next thing was what is known as MCOOL.
Mm.
And that acronym stands for Mandatory Country of Origin Labeling, which was already a law. They just were not enforcing it because Canada and Mexico complained of basically not being fair.
Somebody's not playing nice in the sandbox.
Yeah, and so they threw a fit like
Good
that's not
grief.
fair. You're not allowing us to be a part of a fair market, and it was attached to other trade agreements, so that
Hmm.
it's not as simple as we all make it out to be. But listen, I'm an American first person. That's just who
Yeah.
I am. Do
Right.
I think that if you look at the world from space, are there borders that you can see from space around the globe? No, there are not. I think in a perfect world, God meant us all to be together, but also we live in a world where our cultures are so different that we have to
Hmm.
have borders to protect ourselves. And also we need to protect our American farmers and ranchers first and make sure they are the ones that we have a priority over. So mandatory MCOOL was not being enforced, and that recently was changed. So It's a little weak in the way they've done it. You know, it's a political move. So like they didn't just outright say mandatory country of origin, like no matter where it comes from, you have to label it where it comes from.
Okay.
All they said was it's voluntary. So if
Okay.
I import beef from Brazil or Canada or Mexico, I can no longer, because up until, well, even right now until 2026, if it says USA on it, if it has a
Hmm.
USA sticker, most likely is not from the USA. That was the problem. If I had beef in Brazil and I killed it in Brazil and shipped it over in reefers
Hmm.
on a shipping on a super tanker and then further processed it in the United States,
Hmm.
I could put a USA sticker on it. And now
Wow.
you, the consumer at the store, think it's a product of the USA.
Right.
What was changed was in 2026, they can't put USA on it, but they don't have to put anything.
Hmm.
So it's voluntary, which I think is weak. I think the law should state that if it's whatever country it's from, there should be a sticker on there that says Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Canada,
Right.
Mexico, whatever.
Yeah.
So, so the customer knows, so that you, the
Right.
consumer, can choose. And what they're doing is trying to hide that from you.
So, in your advice, and this is just throwing something out there, in what you have seen, is there like a percentage or or numbers where, we were here with our ranchers and, producing and slaughter our beef here, but because of the big four and where we're at today, we've seen this percentage drop. I mean, we've lost a lot of them, right?
The numbers, yeah, oh yeah. The numbers I can tell you is that in 1980, that's when Reagan changed the antitrust laws
Hmm.
that allowed this company to gobble up this company and then this company got, that. So now they could buy out and consolidate.
Hmm.
So Reagan changed that in 1980 that allowed that to happen. In 1980, the big four, there was more than four of them, and they had different names back then. JBS was not around in 1980. They only controlled 25% of the
Wow.
market,
Yeah.
and now it's 85. Now, I don't know the number of farms and ranches that were around then, but what I can
Yeah.
tell you now is that we have less than 2% of our entire American population growing and raising food in the country.
Okay.
So less than 2% of our population is
Wow.
growing food for the other 98%. If the worst case scenario happened where imports stopped, what do you think that means?
That's scary.
Famine. It's total
Right.
famine.
Right.
Let me show you this book, this other book, and you probably saw me talk about it. It's Red
Yeah.
Famine.
Yep. Yep.
Red Famine talks about communist collectivization of farms during Stalin's reign, started with Lenin, then went into Stalin.
Hmm.
And because they became centralized,
Hmm.
they estimate that nobody knows because they hit it, but 4 million people starved to death, famine from
Right.
1932 to 33.
Wow.
The book is just so eye-opening because when you look at what is happening in our country, specifically related to the food supply chain, there are policies being put in place, decisions being put in place, like this whole fake issue with the carbon, with
Hmm.
global warming. That's all fake. And I think it's fake to control our food because if
Hmm.
I can say, your cows are the problem. And just like in Ireland, I think it was, they want to kill
Ooh,
200,000 head of cows.
yeah.
So if I can, I'm going to kill your cows, but don't worry, James. I've got a proprietary blend of ingredients to make a food out of the factory that gives you all the nutrients you need. Just trust me, it's going to be good for you.
Yeah.
And our carbon footprint
Okay.
is lower, which also is bullshit. But now I think it's related to what's called intellect. What I don't call it anything. It's just what it is: intellectual food property. Because if
Hmm.
it's my ingredients, if it's my formula, you don't have a choice but to buy it from me. Just
Okay.
like in the pharmaceutical industry, if I outlaw all the natural medicines growing of the earth,
Hmm.
and I have the proprietary ingredient for, if cannabis can help with muscle aches, but I'm not allowed to smoke cannabis, I can only buy ibuprofen.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I can't make ibuprofen, so my only choice is to buy it from the pharmaceutical company that makes ibuprofen.
Right. Right.
As just as an example.
What do you think about like with all this going on and throwing in this whole lab grown meat thing? Like I call it the petri dish to table.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
It's just more of what I just described,
yeah.
intellectual food property.
Okay. Okay.
And they're going to vilify natural food that's been on this planet for thousands of years, right?
Hmm.
Since the dawn of man, we've eaten meat.
Yep.
Now that's wrong and not healthy for us or the planet. So here's the alternative, which is, petri dish food.
Yeah. Right. Right. And I mean, it's getting sort of shut down to a certain extent, isn't it?
Well, this
I
is
mean,
what I want.
definitely Italy, but
Well, yeah, and this is what I want people to hear. Like, this is a very concerning and daunting fight.
hmm
The more I get into it, the more I see the actors behind the scenes that most people aren't, that I wasn't aware of prior to
hmm
COVID,
Right.
the more I'm concerned. And I also have hope and faith in miracles
Sure.
because look what we did. And when I say we, us, the consumers, look what we did to Beyond Meat. We
Right.
destroyed that company.
Right.
Nobody, you've heard the term voting with your dollar.
hmm
Man, that is absolutely legitimate. And if you look at what's happening with companies like Beyond Meat, they can shout and yell all they want and pay for all these marketing ads and all these different things.
Right.
If we just choose to spend our money somewhere else, it don't matter what they say. It goes
Right.
nowhere and eventually they flop. And so
Right. And it's just so much better to keep the money at home and in your community.
when you buy food
You
local,
can,
I read
yeah.
somewhere that when you buy local food,
hmm
70% of that money stays local.
Which is huge. It's a
Well,
must. I mean, they're your neighbor.
look what if you look at
Yeah.
what Will Harris did at White Oaks Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia,
hmm
that town was a ghost town because
Yeah.
agriculture got destroyed and Atlanta was 3 hours away. Everybody moved into the city and left town because they couldn't afford it because people weren't buying food from their local producers anymore. They changed that entire town.
Mm.
80% of the people in town now work at White Oaks Pastures.
That's
And
awesome.
it's
Okay.
a thriving, bustling community now because
Right.
of local food.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, it's very interesting too, because like even here, we have some, pretty amazing people that are working on putting things together. They have a hard time they get bottlenecked, whether it be transportation or slaughterhouse opportunity. And then, like you said before, they're spending money, on that, which it's a cost and these things add up and then it goes to the consumer and prices go up and it's a challenge, and I think working from different organizations here that are coming together to try to, figure out how they can put this thing together. They've been working really hard on that. So, it would be
Awesome.
great. It would be great to see that come to fruition and they're
Great.
building it and working hard. So it's
Good.
pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
But
awesome.
yeah, yeah. I was looking at the RCAF USA.
Hmm.
For some of us over here, can you kind of explain, them a little bit? And I know that you're a huge supporter of them and they're amazing too.
Yeah, I am, and I'm glad you asked. So RCAF, there's a my observation is all of the legacy groups, I'll say companies or nonprofits groups that have been around for decades, we've now seen them become compromised. They've
Okay.
been they've been bought and paid for by special interests, whether it's lobbyists or corporations doing business directly with them through sponsorships or whatever. So they've been compromised. RCAF was stood up in response to that happening in the cattle industry.
Mm,
There's an organization, and I throw them under the bus enough, so I won't call them out by name, but there's an organization that is that legacy organization,
okay.
and they're compromised. And
Okay.
here's why I say that so plainly. Look at the industry.
hmm
Is it better or worse than when you started advocating? If it's worse, meaning worse prices, lower numbers in cattle producers, all of these issues that everybody's facing, if it's worse, why? You're not doing your job. Then why aren't you doing your job? What else is going on? So they're not doing their job. These legacy organizations,
hmm
if they were doing their job, the cattle industry would be thriving. The other industries that were supporting the other, enterprises like lamb and pork and chicken, they would all be thriving, but none of
Yep.
those agencies did their job.
Right. Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so RCAF recognized this. And so they are taking a stand for the independent cattle producer. And
Okay.
by the way,
Very
cattle
cool.
is they're the last bastion of freedom in terms of industry that we have left in our country.
Okay.
The pork industry is destroyed, the chicken industry is destroyed, and the lamb industry, 75% of the lamb sold in the United States is imported. Yes.
Mm.
So RCAF is the ones who go to war in Washington to fight these battles legally, like the MCOOL, like RFID ear tags for cows that can track every movement, which is a whole nother, thing you can
Yeah, I
talk
saw
about.
that too.
That's what I'm saying when I said earlier, like if you peel back the layers and you start
Yeah.
looking at the corruption,
Yep.
it's scary. And the average person doesn't know this. I think that the best thing our country could benefit from is if every single consumer decided they were going to learn about their food,
Hmm.
which I don't think is too much to ask because human beings need three things: food, shelter, and safety. And food being number one. I put water in with that. So anybody that's, going to harp on me for it, just get
Right.
off your high horse. But we have this excuse: I'm too busy worrying about my own industry or my own job or my own hobbies or whatever. None of the rest of your life matters without food.
Yep.
None of it. Throughout history, there's evidence. When you read a book like this and you wonder why people felt no sorrow when their own father starved and died laying in front of them. I mean,
Yeah.
there's examples of kids saying, "To hell with them, I'm hungry."
Wow.
Dad literally just starved to death in front of them and they don't care. Imagine
Wow.
that's your parent and you are in a position where you have no remorse because you are so hungry that
Yeah.
it doesn't register in the brain the way it does now. And that's just one example. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl was a POW, was a Jewish prisoner in the concentration camps, and then became a psychologist. And when people said, "Why didn't you guys stand up against your captors? There were thousands of you prisoners and only, a dozen or so guards." And he
Hmm.
said, his answer was, when you are truly starving to death, you don't think about anything else other than your next meal, including shoveling your neighbor's ashes out of a kiln.
Oh
Now,
man.
those aren't his words exactly, but that's what he's saying. So
Yeah. Tragic.
every human being in the United States should be invested in knowing personally where their food supply comes from and what it does to their body.
Right.
So RFIDs is one of these other things. It's tags for the cows here because, like I said, ranchers are the last bastion of freedom, meaning nobody controls them. Not by and large. They have taxes and insurance and grazing fees and water rights. They're always battling. That's a level of control, but
Mhm.
truly nobody controls them. They don't have a crop farmers subsidies. Ranchers don't have subsidies covering their crops if they don't get purchased.
Right.
They either get their cattle sold or they don't. There's no government organization, which is a good thing because those subsidies end up becoming like welfare, where
Mm.
you then follow the rules of the people paying you because you've now built your operation around the demands and requirements of receiving these subsidies. So RFID tracking of your cow's ears, they put a
Hmm.
tag in the ear and now they can see every movement it makes, where you're putting it, where it's going, how it was transferred. The danger of that is now somebody has direct knowledge and access to every single animal across the nation, and they shouldn't have that level of control. I'm a
Yeah.
private individual. I should be able to raise my cattle without you looking over my shoulder.
Yeah.
So RFID chips is one that RCAF is fighting against.
Okay.
I learned about the Sustains Act through RCAF. The Sustains Act would give private entities the ability to do direct open business with federal organizations. So let me break that down for you.
Yeah.
If I'm JBS
Hmm.
and you're USDA, I can say, "Hey USDA, here's $1 billion to sponsor you.
Oh.
You will not make any decisions that
Oh
would
boy.
affect me because I sponsored you."
Yeah. Yeah. Payoff.
Guess what? JBS, the CEOs went to prison because they bribed 1,800 Brazilian federal officials, including their president,
Wow.
and went to jail for that. They're basically the mafia. Now, our government is trying to pass a law that would say they can go ahead and openly sponsor and fund federal organizations. That's more scary to me than any other
Yeah.
regulation we're fighting.
Wow. Okay. Well, hopefully that doesn't go through.
I agree.
Good grief.
And
Okay.
that's kind of like part of my mission. A big part of the mission is that when we create a place like From the Farm where people
Hmm.
come to trust the food and trust the message about their food, and these kinds of things are happening,
Yep.
we now have the ability to say, "Hey, James, just so you know, your state is trying to, like Oregon, your state
Hmm.
is trying to put policy in place that's going to shut down all of our dairy producers on a small scale because they're requiring them to meet the same level of regulation as the large operations. You should go and vote that down. If
Wow.
we have millions of buyers on a platform where they can trust the message and then act
Yeah.
on it, like everything going on in Europe with the farmers and with the farmers over
Yeah,
there,
that's a mess. Yeah.
if they were stood shoulder to shoulder with all of the consumers of that country, it'd be over. They
Right.
would run their government out of office and replace them with people that gave a shit about their food. But
Wow.
the farmers and ranchers over there, they don't have ranchers, but the farmers over there are doing it themselves. I
Yeah.
get messages all the time on my social media. When are the farmers and ranchers in America going to stand up? And I'm like, that's bullshit. When are you, the consumers, going to stand up for your food security and food freedom and keep our farmers and ranchers in the field growing food for us so that we don't have to have a disruption?
Right.
All of those tractors, all of those farms that are not plowing and tilling fields right now, they're not producing food.
Right.
When does that show up as a problem? So it should be the citizens who rely on the producers going to war for them so they can stay in the fields and keep growing our food.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay. Wow. Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing. In the sense of connecting with you, or this software, this program is connected through via website, right? Not an
Yes.
app.
It's not an
Okay.
app. It's a web form. So the website is fromthefarm.io.
Okay.
It has been designed to be an app someday, but app development is more tedious and more expensive. So we might
Sure.
just keep it a web-based platform.
Sure.
I did learn a way that you can actually save it on your phone as if it's an app, which is pretty
Oh,
cool.
cool. That's great.
Yeah, you can do that with any website apparently. So,
Okay.
yeah, so it's web. So a lot of people are like, I can't find it in the app store. You're right, my fault, because I keep calling it an app, and then people
Yeah.
go look.
Well,
So,
yeah. I mean, we're so conditioned by,
mhm.
apps and things. So, I
Yep,
mean, yeah. Well, hopefully it'll get there at some point because it sure sounds like it will because you're rolling, killing it out there with everything.
yeah, yeah.
So now they can go to, you have your podcast, right?
We have our podcast. It was Feed the People. Now it's our next episode that will be coming out. So you can still go find Feed the People on Spotify and all those places. We're rebranding. It'll be called From the Farm.
Okay. Very
And so
cool.
that the next episode will record in the next week or so and then be released. We
Okay.
just released our last one with Austin Frerick from Barron's. He
Oh, very
was,
cool.
yeah,
Okay.
so we just released that yesterday.
Okay.
And then you can, like I said, from thefarm.io. My Instagram is _J_Richards on
Okay.
Instagram. There's some nefarious things happening in terms of shadow banning and silencing that are definitely happening there. So I'm also
Right.
on X, and on X, it's just my name, AJ Richards.
Okay. Yeah. You notice the more we talk about this stuff, the more those nice little messages come through.
Totally.
The
I'm
other
like,
fan mail.
yeah, I'm like, oh wow, I didn't realize food was so political. But I
Yeah,
mean, it's
it
really
sure
not.
is.
It's like it's who's ever donating or spending money as a sponsor on those platforms can control it. So
Right.
I have found if I do any videos or posting targeting, fake meat or lab grown meat or something like that,
Yeah.
I kind of get a little bit of silence going on. So
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Well, it was awesome. AJ, thank you for your time. And maybe we can do this again sometime, get an update.
yeah, it'd be great.
All
Appreciate you having me
right.
on, James.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Yeah. All right, everyone. That is a wrap. You can check us out if you like that. Subscribe. Also, the Instagram, Chef Massey. Let's keep it simple. ChefMassey.com. Have a good one. Bye for now.